Hello guys, welcome to another video of Antibiotics Made Simple. In the first video, I had explained you beta lactams using Attack on Titan reference, and in this video, I'm gonna explain you protein synthesis inhibitors using Naruto characters. I always had this confusion regarding protein synthesis inhibitors, which was 30S, which was 50S, and there are so many drugs. It was very difficult to remember the mechanism of each and every drug. I definitely used to study, but 2-3 days later, I used to forget them. I know you guys are also facing the same problem, so let me make it simple for you so that you remember the protein synthesis inhibitor better and you don't get confused when you see an MCQ on a protein synthesis inhibitor. Now, before we go to understand the drugs, I want you to understand the bacterial protein synthesis first. Because when you understand the protein synthesis, you will know exactly where these drugs act and what step of the protein synthesis are they inhibiting. Now, take a look at this. Let's suppose this is your bacterial mRNA and it has these codons over it, and AUG is the start codon which codes for methionine. So let's suppose there's a tRNA with a complement of this AUG, that is UAC, which carries the methionine. So now the ribosomal RNA attaches to this mRNA where you have the 30S subunit and you have the 50S subunit. And the 50S subunit is divided into three parts. That is your E site, P site, and A site. So what happens? The tRNA carrying methionine will enter the P site and attaches where the start codon is. So this amino acid. So this is when the translation process starts. So now the A site is empty, right? So let's suppose this is a codon containing CCA, and there's another tRNA which is carrying phenylalanine, for example. Now this tRNA containing phenylalanine enters the A site, and now there's an enzyme called peptidyl transferase which catalyzes the bond formation between these two amino acids. Now when the bond is formed, suppose this is the mRNA, the ribosomal RNA will slide over it. So what happens? The tRNA which is in the P site will now enter the E site. So let me show you how it happens. Let's copy this image. So the next step is gonna look like this. So whatever tRNA was in the P site now has an E site, that is exit. So the tRNA now is going to exit this site, and another which is complementary to the next codon, let's suppose that this is carrying alanine, will now enter the A site. And the process repeats. The peptidyl transferase will create another bond. The same process happens. The ribosomal RNA will again move along the mRNA. And again, when the tRNA enters the E site, it's going to exit. So this process continues, and the amino acid chain is gonna keep on elongating until a stop codon comes in the A site. So when the stop codon comes, there is no tRNA will now enter the A site, and when the ribosome moves, it's just the protein which comes out. The translation process is completed and the protein is now ready. So this is the complete process of protein synthesis. Please mention in the comments if you know the names of the three stop codons. Let's see how much do you remember of your NEET UG days. So now that you have understood the protein synthesis, you will have a better understanding of where the drugs exactly act and what process are they halting. So let's go. Now what are the drugs that are in protein synthesis inhibitors? I want you to remember a mnemonic. Buy at 30 and sell at 50. So this 80 is 30s and cell is 50s. So what is this mnemonic? Take a look at this. A stands for Aminoglycosides and D stands for Tetracyclines. And these two act on the 30th subunit of the ribosomal mRNA. And what is the cell? C is for chloramphenicol, E is for erythromycin, which is a class of, or example of macrolides. L is for lincosamide or clindamycin, for example. And another L stands for Linezolid. You can add an S as well here. That stands for streptogramins. For that extra knowledge, if you want to be the topper. So these are the drugs which act on the ribosomal RNA, and we'll discuss them one by one. The first class of drugs are aminoglycosides. What they do is they attach to the 30th ribosome and they cause misreading of the protein, due to which the protein which the bacteria synthesizes will become faulty and the bacteria cannot survive with that faulty protein. And this is the only class which is bactericidal in nature, and others are bacteriostatic. So to understand this better, I want you to imagine aminoglycosides as Itachi. So what Itachi does is he'll put his enemy under genjutsu, so that they think they are fighting Itachi, but in reality they're fighting themselves, they're killing themselves. So this is exactly what aminoglycosides do. Let's suppose this is your aminoglycoside and it has attached to the 30th ribosome. Now what happens is this puts the ribosomal RNA in a genjutsu, causes misreading of this codon. Now the ribosomal RNA misreads this. Instead of coding it with phenylalanine, it has something else. Let's suppose it has added another methionine. Now this has resulted in a fault producing faulty protein, and this will collapse the entire protein synthesis factory and kills the bacteria. So this is how the aminoglycoside act. So it causes misreading of the proteins and will result in a faulty protein which the bacteria cannot survive. But sometimes Itachi's genjutsu can be so dangerous that it can even put your allies into genjutsu. If someone from your team also looks in Itachi's eyes, it can affect him as well. So aminoglycosides have certain deadly side effects, that is nephro and ototoxicity. So the next time when someone asks you what are the side effects of aminoglycosides, I don't want you uttering nausea, vomiting. I want you to remember Itachi, and I want you to actually remember these two side effects and answer it in the Viva next time. And what are the drugs which are present in aminoglycosides? For that also I want you to remember a mnemonic, NATs. That is gentamicin, netilmicin, amikacin, tobramycin, and streptomycin. These are the most common drugs which are used in clinical practice. And what is the spectrum of action of the aminoglycosides? These mostly act on the gram-negative bacteria, that is the Enterobacteriaceae family, which contains your E. coli, Klebsiella, and also it acts on TB. So now you know the mechanism of aminoglycosides, you know the side effects, you know what drugs are in the aminoglycoside scene, you also know the spectrum of action. So this is how I want you to remember this. I don't want you to mug up the topic. I don't want you to memorize, because 2-3 days later you'll definitely forget them. So the next time you want to remember something on aminoglycosides, I want you to remember Itachi. Whatever I have explained, it will come to you like a movie. Because when you remember Itachi, you know, yeah, Itachi uses genjutsu. Aminoglycoside has something to do with genjutsu. And you know, yeah, it cast genjutsu on 30th ribosome and it caused misreading of proteins. And yeah, genjutsu can affect our allies as well. And what does it do? It can affect your ear and kidneys, phototoxicity, nephrotoxicity. And what are the drugs? I need to remember GNATs. Where do they act most commonly? Gram negative and TB. So that's it. It just took you 5 minutes to revise the entire aminoglycosides. Not even 5 minutes. It just took you 30-40 seconds, right? So I want you to practice studying like this. I don't want you to mindlessly read everything. But what do you guys do? You try to study everything, try to remember everything, but while solving an MCQ or a week later when you don't remember, you get frustrated, you get stressed, you try to read it again, and everything starts feeling new to you. So I want you to develop this kind of habit of studying. I want you to develop your visual prowess just like Itachi. I want you to put the notes under genjutsu. So that's it for aminoglycosides. Now the next class of drugs are tetracyclines. What these drugs do is they are attached to the 30th ribosome near the A site, which prevents the tRNA from entering the A site and forming the elongation of the chain. Now I want you to remember tetracyclines as Madara uchiha. So what he does, if suppose Madara is standing on the battlefield and the enemies have sensed his aura from far behind and they don't have the guts to face him, so no enemy dares to face him head on, right? So let's suppose this tetracycline is your Madara uchiha. So what this does is it does not allow the tRNA to enter the A site. Now the tRNA is scared is by the overwhelming presence of the tetracycline. He doesn't dare to enter the A site, and the elongation process is now at a halt. But remember, the enemy hasn't faced Madara head on, right? He's still alive. In the same way, the bacteria is still alive, but The elongation is not getting done. So the tetracyclines are bacteriostatic drugs and they are not bactericidal. And what are the drugs I want you to remember in tetracycline classes? I want to remember doxy, minocycline, and tetracycline, obviously. And what is the spectrum of action? This has a wide spectrum of action, but I want you to remember mainly these are used in case of parasites like malaria, rickettsia, mycoplasma. Okay, and the side effects you can say nausea, vomiting in this class of drugs. Now, next we will discuss about the drugs acting on the 50S ribosomal subunit. And the first drug is chloramphenicol. What chloramphenicol does is it directly acts on the peptidyl transferase and inhibits this enzyme. So there is no cross linkage between the amino acids and the elongation procedure halts. So imagine this chloramphenicol as Sasuke's chidori, precisely attacking the enemy at his weak point. So this is Sasuke's chidori destroying the peptidyl transferase. So the bond formation doesn't happen and the elongation process halts. So chloramphenicol is used only in developing countries and in conditions like typhoid, meningitis. And I want you to remember a specific side effect that's called gray baby syndrome. This is the only question which can be asked from chloramphenicol, either the mechanism or the side effect. Now the next class of drugs I want you to remember are macrolides. What these do, these again bind to the 50S subunit and prevent the movement of ribosomal RNA over the mRNA. So again the elongation process halts, and I want you to remember macrolides as Shikamaru. So what he does is he uses his shadow paralysis jutsu. The enemy can't move and he is trapped in the location he is already standing. So that's what macrolides do. They halt the process of elongation. They don't allow the ribosomal RNA to move over the mRNA, thereby halting the protein synthesis. What are the drugs I want you to remember in this class? I want you to remember erythromycin, azithromycin, and clarithromycin. And where do you commonly use this? Erythromycin is used in pertussis, clarithromycin in case of H. pylori, and azithromycin is used in chlamydia, that is atypical pneumonia, and sexually transmitted infections. Now, the next class of drugs are lincosamides or clindamycin, for example. So, what this does is this also attaches to the 50S ribosome. Let's suppose this is your clindamycin, and what it does is it prevents the peptide bond formation. It doesn't inhibit the enzyme, but it prevents the peptide bond formation. There's a difference between chloramphenicol and clindamycin. Chloramphenicol directly inhibited the peptidyl transferase enzyme, but clindamycin is not directly acting on the enzyme, but it's preventing the bond formation. I want you to remember clindamycin's mechanism as Gaara's sand coffin. So what Gaara has done, he has built a sand coffin where the peptide bond forms. So now the peptide bond cannot be formed, even though the enzyme is active, but he cannot bind the two amino acids together due to that sand coffin. So clindamycin is Gaara. Now, what is the spectrum of action of clindamycin? I want you to remember it is used above diaphragm for all the anaerobic infections. It is used in case of abscesses, aspiration pneumonia, all your head and neck infections, your meningitis. So, wherever anaerobic bacteria is involved, you can use clindamycin above the diaphragm, and below the diaphragm, you use metronidazole. So, the next drug is linezolid. What linezolid does is it attaches to the 50S subunit of the ribosomal RNA and it prevents the initiation complex. It stops the translation even before it begins. So now I want you to remember linezolid as Naruto's sage mode, because when Naruto is in sage mode, he can sense the danger even before it begins. So linezolid is exactly like that. It doesn't even allow the translation process to start. It doesn't even allow the start codon to attach to the mRNA. And since this linezolid is as powerful as Naruto Sage Mode, it is also used in defeating powerful bacteria like vancomycin-resistant Enterococcus and methicillin-resistant Staph aureus. So it can also be used in skin infections and conditions like that, but this is where linezolid acts with highest efficiency. So that's it for today's video on protein synthesis inhibitors. I hope you really could make some sense out of the mechanisms relating it to Naruto characters. So let's have a quick revision now, shall we? So we saw how the bacteria synthesizes its protein, and we saw what drugs act on the 30S and 50S subunits of the ribosomes. And to summarize the mechanism, Aminoglycosides was Itachi. He used genjutsu to cause misreading of proteins. And tetracyclines was Madara uchiha. He even prevented enemy from entering the A site. Chloramphenicol was Sasuke's chidori. He directly attacked the peptidyl transferase enzyme. And macrolides were like Shikamaru's shadow paralysis. It prevented the movement of ribosomal RNA over the mRNA. Clindamycin was like Gaara's sand coffin, and Linezolid was Naruto's sage mode. So this is what I want you to remember about the protein synthesis inhibitors, all the kind of drugs, all the mechanisms, and what are the important spectrum. And the next time you get stuck during an MCQ, I want you to remember the Naruto character which I had associated with each of the class, and you will remember everything like a story. So please share this video to your friends who always struggle with antibiotics and end up answering nausea vomiting as a side effect for everything. And please mention in the comments if you want me to create more such videos on antibiotics. And don't forget to subscribe because a lot of interesting videos are on its way. Thank you for watching.